A knight could prepare for a sword thrust. He could brace for an arrow storm. He could even stand against the roar of a cannon. But how does a warrior fight an enemy he cannot see? An enemy that rides on the breath of a friend and kills not with steel, but with silence. This is not the story of a battle. It is the story of a plague. The Black Death. In this video, we will reveal how this unseen killer didn't just claim lives. It systematically dismantled the entire feudal world, broke the chains of serfdom, and destroyed the very economic foundation that the knight stood upon. Part 1. The Unbreakable Pyramid. The World Before the Plague. Before the mid-14th century, the world of the knight was built upon a rigid, seemingly eternal pyramid. At the top was the king. Below him were the great lords and knights. And at the very bottom, forming the vast base of this entire structure, were the peasants, the serfs. A serf was not a slave, but he was not a free man. He was legally tied to the land he worked. He could not leave, could not marry, and could not even grind his own grain without his lord's permission. His labor was the engine that powered everything. The food he grew fed the castle. The rents he paid funded the knight's armor and warhorse. The knight's entire existence, his wealth, his power, his very ability to be a warrior, depended entirely on this massive, stable, and immobile workforce. The system had worked for centuries. It seemed as unshakable as the stone walls of their castles. But it had a fatal flaw. It relied on the one thing the Black Death would destroy: people. Part 2. The Scythe of God. The arrival of the Black Death. In 1347, the plague arrived in Europe. It was a biological apocalypse. It moved with terrifying speed, spreading along trade routes carried by rats on merchant ships. It was a disease of horrifying symptoms, swollen lymph nodes, or buboes that turned black-eye fevers and internal bleeding. Death was often swift and agonizing. It was an indiscriminate killer. It swept through crowded cities and isolated villages alike. It killed priests in their monasteries, merchants in their homes, and peasants in their fields. It also killed knights and nobles in their castles. No amount of steel armor or social status could protect you from the bite of an infected flea. Within 5 years, it is estimated that the Black Death wiped out between 30% and 50% of Europe's entire population. It was a demographic collapse on a scale never seen before or since. The world was hollowed out. But in the eerie silence that followed, a new and unexpected power began to rise from the ashes. Part 3. The Great Upheaval. The peasants' new power. When the plague finally subsided, the survivors woke up in a new world. A world that was suddenly empty. For the first time in centuries, there was a massive, desperate shortage of one crucial resource: labor. And with that shortage, the peasant for the first time had power. A lord who had once had 100 serfs to work his fields might now have only 50. Suddenly, the serf was no longer a disposable cog in a machine. He was a valuable asset. If his lord refused to give him better conditions, he could simply walk away. For the first time, there was somewhere else to go. A neighboring lord, desperate for workers, would gladly welcome him, offering higher wages, lower rents, and more freedom. The chains of serfdom, which had bound the peasantry for generations, simply shattered. The price of labor skyrocketed. The peasants who survived found their quality of life improving dramatically. They had better food, better clothing, and a newfound sense of power. They began to question the very foundation of the world they had been born into. The nobility, of course, was horrified. Their entire economic model was collapsing. Their wealth was tied to the land, but that land was now worthless, without people to work it. They saw their power slipping away, and they reacted with force. Part 4. The Class War. The Great Peasant Revolts. The ruling class tried to turn back the clock. Across Europe, kings and nobles passed laws designed to force the peasants back into their old roles. In England, the Statute of Labourers of 1351 attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and make it illegal for peasants to leave their lord's land. This was a declaration of war. The peasants, having tasted freedom and economic power, refused to go back. The result was a series of massive, violent uprisings across the continent. This was not just a riot, it was a class war. The most famous of these was the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Tens of thousands of commoners, led by figures like Wat Tyler, marched on London. They were not just a disorganized mob, they were organized, armed, and fueled by a radical new ideology that questioned the very existence of the nobility. Their famous slogan, preached by the priest John Ball, was "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" They burned castles, destroyed tax records, and hunted down and executed high-ranking officials, including the Archbishop of Canterbury. Knights were now forced to fight not a foreign army for glory, but their own enraged workforce for survival. The social pyramid had been turned upside down, and the knights were staring up at the furious base they had once stood upon. The Black Death was the unseen enemy that delivered a fatal blow to the world of the knight. It did not kill him with sickness, though many died. It killed him by destroying the economic system that was his life support. The plague shattered the bonds of feudalism, freed the serfs, and transferred immense economic power to the common man. Without a stable, tied-down workforce, the manor system collapsed. Without the income from their lands, the knightly class could no longer afford their extravagant lifestyle of war. The great peasant revolts were the violent aftershocks of this economic earthquake. They signaled that the old deference, the old order, was dead. The knight was no longer an untouchable master, but just another landowner, struggling to stay afloat in a new and hostile world. This story of how a microscopic organism could topple a social order is a powerful reminder of the fragility of power. If you believe these deep historical connections are worth exploring, show your support by hitting the like button. And to continue our journey into the end of this era, subscribe to The Knight's Journey and ring the notification bell. Because history's greatest revolutions are not always won with swords. Sometimes they are won by the silent, invisible forces that change everything.